Hello, everybody. It's Liam. Before we jump into this week's episode, I wanted to welcome anyone who's new to the show. If you're a fan of One Heat Minute or any of the podcasts featuring this week's guest, Blake Howard, this is our third season. Our first season, we explored the Oeuvre of John Cassavetes. And in our second season, we looked at 15 or 16 films, give or take, starring Philip Seymour Hoffman, and this season is, of course, on Batman. But they're all available to you wherever you get podcasts, oeuvrebusters.com. We're also on Instagram and Twitter, on Twitter, and follow us and say hi to us. And please rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And we hope you enjoy this episode. Bye-bye. I'm Liam Billingham.
I'm George Fragopoulos.
And I'm Blake Howard.
Another special guest.
And this is
Oeuvre
Busters.
Yes. Totally nailed it, Blake.
Thanks.
Amazing.
Appreciate it. I'll be here all week. I live in a pan-national world where I constantly am speaking to folks in either Los Angeles or New York City, and so it's nice to be in now three places at once.
Pandemic national world, if you will.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I couldn't.
You almost made me spit my Coke on my board here, but thank you. Thank you for that perfectly timed joke.
Please don't do that. We'll feel terrible. So Blake, we're really excited to have you.
Well, thank you for having me on.
I want to give a quick, if you don't mind, I'd like to give a quick introduction. You're a writer, podcaster, and the editor-in-chief of co-founder of the Australian film blog Graffiti with Punctuation. And I first heard about your podcast, One Heat Minute, which is a minute-by-minute dissection of heat. And the first time I heard of that, I was like, this is like literally makes sense. I cannot think of a movie more deserving of a minute-by-minute dissection than Heat. So loved that show. The first one I listened to, or the first one that I heard was... I worked backwards. I heard the Michael Mann episode first.
Yeah, well, that once that was released, I think that's the entry point. And unfortunately, it's like, guys, that's it. That's as good as this show gets.
Well, what was cool about it is that I then got to go backwards and start at the beginning, and was just like, oh my god, like I have literally as many hours or close to hours of content about Heat as I could possibly imagine. So I was psyched. And also, you did the last 12 minutes of the Mohegans,
yes,
which is kind of describes itself. And
great title.
Now it's such a great title. And then All the President's Minutes, which if there's ever another movie that deserves a minute by minute dissection, I think it's All the President's Minutes or All the President's Men. What are you going to do next? Zodiac.
Liam. So right now, One Heat Minute Productions currently has another great podcast on there called Increment Vice, which is hosted by my amazing pilot of that show. I'm just the producer in the background, Travis Woods. And so that is our focus right now, is Increment Vice. And there's a little bonus 6-episode series with my best friend Maria, who's Maria Lewis, who's a journalist and author. We're doing a 6-episode limited series called Josie and the Podcats, which is just a 6-episode history of. So they're what's next. And you are now like the latest podcast of, you are part of very rarefied company. Brian Koppelman, one of the writers and showrunners of Billions, and the co-writer, co-writer of Rounders, Manola Dargis, the chief film critic of the New York Times, who are both shouting that the next podcast I need to do a minute-by-minute analysis on is Zodiac. So look, all I will say is there are other projects that are in the wings, and I obsessively watch films and some TV shows, and right now in a pandemic, my brain is ticking over faster than it ever has before. So I'm very likely to announce new projects soon. But that is definitely one of the ones that is in consideration. It's a flat out masterpiece.
Nice.
I just rewatched it for the 50th time with my wife last week. And I felt like she really liked it. But I was just like sitting there talking through the entire thing like, oh. Ugh, and I think by the end of it...
Was she like, I can't believe you've seen this film 50 times. Is there something terribly, terribly wrong with you? Blake, can I just ask you just very briefly,
yes,
what gave you the idea of doing a kind of minute-by-minute breakdown of a film in general? Because it sounds like a really fascinating kind of durational project.
Yeah, it is. Look, I would say I have to take the credit is with, the Star Wars Minute is what I call like the text. It's like the OG. And those guys were an inspiration. It started out literally with it's like the itch that could never be scratched. It's the thirst that could never be satiated, that I loved this movie so much and I was constantly drawn back to it. And I hadn't really articulated that to anyone until like a couple of my best mates and I was sitting down and I was shooting the shit about what the next project I wanted to undertake was. And, they had a bit of like a come to Jesus moment. Like, what do you want to do? Like, what do you want to do? And just kept asking me that until I essentially relented and like broke through to, what I perhaps had like shamefully hoarded, which is like, I just want to, excuse me for swearing, but I was just like, I just want to fucking talk about Heat all day.
Fuck it. Yeah, no, please do.
And so when I said that, one of my very good friends did the worst and best thing anyone could have ever done in my life. He just said, that's a show I'd listen to. And so as soon as that happened, it just became, well, how do you do that? So to your point, George, is like, how do you do it? It's like, well, it's a long movie. You want to make sure you cover everything. How do you determine what you would do? And it's like, well, maybe a minute's there. And then when you say 1 Heat minute, it's like, oh, like, it writes itself. And so it's like, well, if I've got anything left to say after 166 minutes of this movie pre-credits, then like I haven't done a good job. I thought that would be exhaustive. And so then it just sort of happened that way. And I really found, it's such a really cool way to unpack something, and it really tests scrutiny. And for me, it just like trained my brain so that now when I watch a movie, or especially when I obsessively watch them, I wonder, is this a personal sort of shameful secret corner, comfort food movie that has flaws or is this something that's perfection? And that's kind of what like scratched me with All the President's Men, which is another absolute flat out masterpiece, is that I just was obsessed with that as a formal thing. And because I love Heat so much and have an affinity for their obsessive characters, the obsessive nature of the characters and the obsessive nature of the director and the obsessive nature with which it has been put together just seem to all complement those things, and then drew me this great crew of incredibly obsessive Heat obsessives along the journey. So yeah, I think that's what I just couldn't fathom doing it an injustice by not having a way to talk about it in the level of detail that I wanted.
Speaking of obsessive, you are the perfect guest to talk about today's film, which is, I would say, in conversation with Heat, and that film is George. What film are we talking about?
So today, Liam, we are discussing The Dark Knight from the year of our Lord, 2008.
2008.
Sorry, I just had to quickly look it up. Starring Christian Bale, Heath Ledger, Michael Caine, Aaron Eckhart, and Maggie Gyllenhaal. So as far
Gary
as
Oldman,
who Liam
William Fichtner in a small role.
Liam
I gotta
sacrilegiously said is the best part of this film, which we need to also kind of talk about. Outrageous hot takes from Liam. There's gonna be a whole bunch of hot takes. There's a very good chance also that about 5 minutes in, me and Liam are just going to start yelling at each other over Blake.
Fight.
That's fine. That's fine.
So, as far as a quick plot summary, so The Dark Knight picks up pretty much where Batman Begins ends, with the emergence of the Joker as a criminal mastermind, and is kind of this master foil to Batman as a character. So the film begins with this masterful heist, which I'm sure we'll spend a lot of time talking about. And it really kind of takes up from there, and you learn that basically what's been going on is that the Joker has been stealing money from mob bosses in an attempt to kind of just sow chaos, and obviously to get all these mob bosses on his side to eventually kill the Batman. We're also introduced to Harvey Dent, who is the Gotham District Attorney, who is busy doing what district attorneys do, trying to put bad guys away. He is dating Rachel, who is Bruce Wayne's former love interest, who in the first film is played by Liam.
Katie Holmes.
Katie Holmes. And we'll maybe talk about Maggie versus Katie. And then Dent
Maggie v. Katie.
Maggie v. Katie. And then Dent eventually becomes Two-Face, and Batman has to contend with both of these villains who in some sort of way represent different aspects of his own identity.
Pretty good.
Thank you.
Good.
I too am a professional, Liam. At least when
you're
I want
a professional.
to be.
Yeah, you're doing great.
In Heat parlance, pretty fucking great.
Pretty fucking great.
Pretty fucking great.
Before we jump in, Blake, I understand you're a big Batman fan. What sparked your Batman love?
Batman 66. Batman 66 is my great love in Australia. It was played in the afternoons after school when I was in primary school.
Okay.
In syndication. And so I saw Batman then and obsessively loved Batman from that moment. And then I think, like maybe some of the guests even of this show, and the host of this show rather, it's, you know, I had that 1989 Batman watershed moment. I think it was like the second or the first movie I ever saw at the big screen, and I just obsessively loved him ever since. And so I've been a huge avid comic book fan of like a whole bunch of different runs and things like that. And I love all the movies and have obsessed over them. And I particularly love the Chris Nolan Batmans, very obsessively. But I'm not exclusively in love with those. Like I think Batman Returns is a flat out masterpiece. I think it's way better than 89. I love Batman the Animated Series, and pound for pound, episode for episode, you know, the adaptions and the interpretations of comic books. Like they should be taught how to adapt comic book stories into anything, because they just choose really carefully about what's their universe and how to sort of express it. And I unabashedly love going back to Batman 66. And in fact, I show my kids Batman 66 because it's just adorable. It's one of the funniest shows ever made. And it's underrated. You don't realize that it's a complete joke and everyone's in on it. But I mean, Cesar Romero painted his moustache, for Christ's sake. It's hilarious. It's like, that's all. It's just the best. Like I could watch every episode of that show. I love how warm it is and like falsely earnest, and like without winking, it's totally winking at the whole audience the whole time. It's brilliant. But yeah, so I love Batman, and I even really, really like Ben Affleck's performance in Batman v Superman. I think he's a great Batman. Real cynical, hard-edged, great Batman. The movie is very, very compromised, but he's a terrific Batman in it. So, like, yeah.
He is really good. He's a great Bruce Wayne, too. He's got the right vibe.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of Kilmer in Batman Forever, though. A lot of people are like, that might find that sacrilegious. I'm sorry, but he also made a movie for Warner Brothers in 1995 in the same year, and it's called Heat. And that's his best performance. So you can all...
Well, he's sleepwalking through one of those movies. Let's just put it that way.
He was also the Iceman, though, in Top Gun. We can't forget that.
No, we can't.
True.
But yeah.
True. Is he in Top Gun 2? He must be, right?
Yeah.
He's in Top Gun 2.
So. I don't think they'd get away with that. So. Somehow. Hopefully he's there.
I didn't mind Affleck's Batman, but every time he'd stop and like stare into the screen and talk about the Red Sox, it was really fucking distracting. I was like, do the Red Sox even exist in the DC universe? I don't like. It was really.
I think it was Gotham Rogues monologues. That's what I think.
God damn it, George.
We should also, by the way, maybe at the very end, rank our Jokers.
Ooh, that's an interesting idea. That's a good idea. I like that. Well, we all can kind of agree that this movie fucking rules, right? I feel like we should just get that.
Yeah.
I think it's I think Batman Returns might be my
undeniably the
favorite.
best comic book movie ever made.
I go back and forth between this movie and Batman Returns. Like every time I watch one of them.
I think I occasionally am a film critic for an enduring, awesome Australian website institution called Dark Horizons, which has been 22 years old in the movie news biz online. And Garth does this great feature. I'll try and send you guys a link so you can throw it up in the description of this podcast. It's where he sort of ranks every single comic book movie that's ever been made, and he uses like an aggregate score of IMDb scores, of Metacritic, and of Rotten Tomatoes, and kind of has like a little mathematical equation to go, okay, what's the top? And the number one undeniable film in that list is The Dark Knight. Like, it's number one. It's been number one for I think 5 years on that list, and Garth periodically updates it and refreshes it and brings it back into the current features. And I'm just it's pretty much the best. Like, for me personally, I think the best three, if I had to rate pound for pound the top three, I think it's Dark Knight, Superman, the original Richard Donner Superman 1. And I would almost say Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I think that is just out of control.
The Spider-Verse is incredible. Spider-Verse
movie,
is like legit.
And I've got a little, I know that you've got a little one, Liam, and like I've got little ones, and my daughter will watch Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. So we've like religiously watched it many, many times, and it loses none of its power. Like I think it's just so good.
I gotta show that to her. That's a good.
I may be a bad father, so just do not listen to anything I show my children.
No. I'm trying to get my kid to watch. I tried to get her to watch the Red
Zodiac?
Balloon on the Criterion channel the other day, and like 2 minutes in, she was like, "I want Elmo," and I was like, "God, I'm failing as a parent.
You're such a Philistine."
That's something very, very wrong.
Like, honey, we're gonna sit down today and we're gonna watch Zodiac, okay?
I'm going to start you on something Fincher light. We're going to put you on the game. The game
There
first.
Will Be Blood, and you're going to like it. There's a child your age. I think the thing that makes this movie work so goddamn was because I rewatched it earlier this week, and I think the previous time I'd watched it was about 2 years ago, and I'm completely blown away by how he's able to take a superhero story and make it like an absolute like reflection of the times that we live in. Like, I think that's this is a great superhero movie, but I also think it's one of the best post 9/11 America movies or world movies ever made, depending on how you look at it. And I'm like completely astonished by, George and I sort of jokingly went back and forth on the politics of this movie, but I think what ultimately, I think the starting point, and I think it is interesting to relate it to Heat, which is obviously a huge influence on this movie starting from the first frame, is how they're both movies are sort of about two professionals or two, highly sophisticated people coming at each other, having to deal with one another. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about Heat is that it doesn't foreground the politics, whereas I think The Dark Knight is, as like a text, is very clearly making political references or very clearly asking us to think about things that are happening. And I just found it such a stunning take on that stuff without necessarily offering a right or wrong to anything that you're seeing in the film, which I think makes it really work as like a piece of filmmaking and storytelling. Yeah,
Nolan's got a great ability to sort of just talk about humanity via the prism of morality and and then he can dance around like political illusions. Like I think I'd go tit for tat because I genuinely adore The Dark Knight Rises for many reasons. And I love that is so overtly political. Like it's like the aggressive Occupy Wall Street, movie. Where people are rioting in the streets and things are getting cut off and shut down. Like, actually might be a pretty good pandemic watch. I
think it's going to be an amazing pandemic watch.
It's just one of those things. But yeah, look, I think Michael Mann talked about, I'm lucky enough to have spoken to him about Heat, and when he talks about the characters played by Robert De Niro and Al Pacino, Vincent Hanna and Neil McCauley, he talks about two guys who are the most similar to one another in the entire universe. And I think that Nolan riffs on that. Like for him, the lure for the professional is less. It's about he has this thing where he loves people who are like self-duplicitous, like they lie to themselves deeply about something. Like that's just runs through his characters, his entire lineage.
His movies are about male anxiety in that way, I think, particularly.
And the gap between perception and reality. So like,
right.
And that's what is so great about the Joker is theatrical. The Joker is chaotic. The Joker is counter to his ecosystem, and he's hyper aware of all those facts. Whereas Batman is theatrical and he is like counter to his system because ultimately he's a vigilante and he's executing this sort of his own vigilante justice over and above. And the Joker like puts that to him. He's like, you're not like them. You're like me. Like he's like, you're not like them. We're alike. Like, don't you understand? And so I love that relationship between the both of them because it's like, this is where Batman gets held to account for what he is. Like, this is what you are. And yeah, so it's very cool. Like, I think someone, I can't remember who I heard it from. It might've been Kevin Smith, where he said like Dark Knight on one of his first watches reminded me of The French Connection. And I think that's a very good, that's a good comparison because you talk about films that are engaging in political ideology whilst they're sort of trying to entertain the shit out of you. I think that that's a great example because, you know, the world of Popeye Doyle is, you know, its politics are worn brazenly on its sleeves. So I think that that's where you can kind of see some of that with Nolan, making a tangible world.
It's funny that you bring the French Connection up because I watched it about a week ago for the first time in a couple of years, and I was blown away at how, in a similar way to Heat, it deals with. It's another film that doesn't speechify about politics, but the politics are laid bare in who he interacts with and who he uses his power over and who he's unable to use his power over. But also just in terms of like just the fact that he's eating dollar pizza and drinking shitty coffee while his mark is, you know, in a French restaurant eating incredibly well says a lot of really, really interesting things about class and who has power in those. It's just very, very interesting. Do you guys feel like watching the film now, or George, I guess I'm curious what you think a little bit too. Do you guys feel like watching the film now, the politics feel different than they did when it came out?
Me personally, no. I mean, I feel it's still very contemporary. And in many respects, obviously, a lot of the things that it does address, whether directly or obliquely, politically speaking, are still things we're very much living with. So it's funny you should say that also too, because in a weird way, I was like, oh, 2008, like this film feels like, when I just remember thinking about the date, I was like, I can't believe this film was 12 years old. But then in many other ways, watching it again, I was like, oh no, this thing could have been released a year or two ago. I mean, so in many respects, it does feel, I mean, again, dated's the wrong word, but there are like those very explicit references, I think, to post 9/11, like Bush's America. So that scene, for example, of rendition is really kind of fascinating and harrowing to kind of.
Which scene?
So when Batman goes to Hong Kong to bring back Lau, and it becomes this kind of not just a vigilante, but a kind of international vigilante.
Yes,
which is really kind of fascinating, but again, also politically troubling. So those kind of things are obviously issues that we're still living with today, issues of class inequality, issues of chaos in law, or chaos is kind of opposed to
order versus chaos.
Yeah.
Which I really think we should get into, because I think that's when we were arguing about this movie, George, you said chaos and order are abstractions.
Yes, thank you. Because in this
film,
welcome.
I'm here to help.
When this film it fails, for me at least, politically speaking, ideologically speaking, is when it deals with those concepts as abstractions.
Interesting. So I'm curious what you guys think about that, because I feel like this ties very, very closely to one of the things that's so interesting about this film is that the Joker supposedly doesn't have a point of view. But I disagree with that reading of the character entirely. I think that's very simplistic.
Yes.
Well, there's no origin, which is also troubling.
Why is it troubling?
Because again, it doesn't ground the ideology. It doesn't ground, let's say, the urge towards chaos. This is not, by the way, an argument that I have made. It's an argument that like other people have made in a far more sophisticated way. But just the idea, obviously, that, and this is where I was talking about like the abstraction. So if let's say the evil or the chaos is coming from this place of non-specificity, that there's nothing actually there compelling it, then it's just pure evil, and it has no ideological basis, and it should just be utterly destroyed.
I think Nolan views characters sometimes like a force of nature. Like he's always talked about the Joker as like, he describes him as like a human equivalent of the shark from Jaws. So like, you know, it's like impulse and id and whatever you want. And I definitely agree that like the abstraction sometimes makes it more scary, but I think an origin for evil, and this is the best way I can describe it. Maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago, people might have gone, you know who's the best villain who's ever existed ever? Darth Vader. He is just the best villain you've ever seen, right? Now, he's a fucking snot. Like, Anakin Skywalker is such a twerp. Who gives a shit? I hate his dumb family.
Right.
I hate everything about Star Wars. Everyone can just burn it all and just go back and get me those 35mm prints, and I'll watch Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, and then we can just torch the rest and
The
burn
Last Jedi.
everything.
And The Last Jedi.
Oh, The Last Jedi. Yeah, we can keep that. Yeah, it's just absolutely garbage. And all this navel-gazing nonsense about his villainy and his origin doesn't do anything to complement the story. In fact, it completely undercuts it, and people have to write around it. And God, people in that Star Wars camp won't shut the fuck up about rewriting this story in ancillary ways. So I adore the abstraction. I love it. Conversely to Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, which I don't think is nearly one of his best performances, nor one of his best films. I don't want to see that the clown prince of crime, the arch nemesis of Batman, this towering psychopath and also genius, like washes his mum in the tub. Like, I don't need to see that shit, and I don't care. Like, I don't want him to be a whiny loser baby. Like, I don't want that. I want the shark from Jaws. I want someone who knows, who can cut through to the ridiculousness of the paradigm. Like, that's what I want. It especially anchored in the reality of what the situation is, in the reality of this universe, and this is the great. It's the sort of great like oxymoron of the whole thing, of like grounding a guy who dresses like a bat to be the hero, is that you kind of have to have someone who points out to him how ridiculous that is to be his key villain, right? And so that's what I love about it. And I think that I think that lack of motivation, that's what the great villains of our time are. Like, Hannibal Lecter likes to eat people. And, he may have had some childhood trauma or whatever, and Thomas Harris tried to, George Lucas ruin it in some, like, pre-writing. But at the end of the day, he's still a guy who just likes it. He just likes it. That's inexplicable. And so for me, when I look at the Joker, like, the minute that Heath Ledger is on screen, it is... I couldn't tell you how soaring it is, and like what has been so tiresome. It's lovely to talk to you guys, but what's been so tiresome since the release of Joker last year is like all these people going, "This is the best ever. It's even better than Heath Ledger." It's like, just stop, you idiots.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I don't want to be rude, but that's fucking bonkers for people to say out loud.
I do briefly want to say though that this, I think what you just said though speaks also, at least for me, to some of the the friendly arguments that I've had with Liam over text about this. So I am not denying that this film is like meticulously crafted. It is amazing. It's super fucking entertaining. Heath Ledger is amazing in it. He's clearly the best fucking part in the film, Liam. It is not fucking Gary Oldman. but that also to me is like those are aesthetic arguments, and I think those, at least to me, are separate to some degree from like the political arguments or the ideological arguments.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I am not saying that this film is not an amazingly well-made film and like super entertaining, and just like, yes, I can watch it. I'm sure I could watch it like once, come back to it multiple times in the future and still be entertaining. But that to me also doesn't, let's say, discount the legitimate, let's say, political critiques that one might have of this character.
I think it's but my I guess my foundational thing is, I think absolutely no argument about the film's quality, like the discourse on quality, could ever like really count to what a political argument is, because it is what it is, right? Like it's people's readings and where you're coming from, and different political readings from different countries, different areas, whatever. You can look at anything like that. But I just think also that when it starts to bridge from the abstraction and the fact that the character has no motivation, like I think you have to address in any argument that that's an entertainment lure as much as it could be a political reading, right? Because like the fun is the chaos. Like everything about him is not only chaos in action, it's chaos in construction. So then you go, oh, okay, and then cool, like read through the political, the political reading of that. But I just think it's like you have to think about functionally. It's an entertainment. It's like it's a driving force in the construction.
He is, yes, as a character, he is far more terrifying because he has no motivation, without question. That I totally agree with.
I think there are also two really interesting moments that highlight kind of the Joker's point of view, and I think that's what's impressive about Nolan, is that he can give you a character's entire history. Like, the thing that always gets talked about in this film is how the Joker is able to be like, you want to know how I got these scars, and then he tells a fake story. But those are interesting, but he's also got these incredible moments. Two of them. One is when he says, when he's kidnapped, one of the Batman pretenders, and he says something like, if you want order in Gotham City, Batman must take off his mask.
Yes.
Which I think is a really interesting kind of statement of what he believes, which is like, as long as there is this vigilante, and of course vigilantism is such a theme of the films, that's a really key moment in the film. And of course the other one is the moment with Harvey Dent when he says, nobody panics if I say a gangbanger's going to get shot, or a busload of soldiers are going to lose their lives. But if you say you're going to kill one mayor, then everyone, loses their mind. And it's such like a key reading to who the character is in terms of his, like, I don't even know if it's like that he's an anarchist, but he's just kind of commenting on the way that he's shaking loose a kind of apathetic quality of how people view their, like, what's going on in the world and what's going on in their city.
Yeah.
And I think that like those moments can't be discounted in terms of what they happen to say about the character in general, and about the film and what the film has to say. And I also really love the moment in the boat at the end when Tiny Lister takes the device and throws it out the window, and that shitty dude is like, let's blow up these prisoners, they made their choices. I think it's all really, really interesting dynamic filmmaking in those moments. So they really work. That stuff really works for me. I don't view it as, I don't mind that the Joker doesn't have an origin, because I think that he's defined in such a Nolan-esque way through action. This film really defines, Nolan's films define their characters through or in action in the case of some of the other films, but I think that really, really works. Let's talk about, do you guys want to talk about Bruce Wayne? Let's talk about Bruce Wayne.
Bruce Wayne.
So what do you guys, versus, I feel like every element of this movie really, everything about this movie is a big improvement to me on Batman Begins, which is a movie I really like, but this is just like, in terms of the cinematography, in terms of the editing, in terms of all those elements. But the thing that blows my mind, one of the things that blows my mind about it, is how much more subtle Christian Bale is able to do the same things in this movie that he was doing in Batman Begins. I think like the moment in the movie when he's like, oh, I own the restaurant, and he gestures at the people, is such a more clearly defined beat than in any of the Bruce Wayne being a douche beats in Batman Begins. So yeah, I'm curious what you guys think about, where does this rank in your Bruce Waynes, Blake?
Yeah, look, I love what he's doing. I think he's very confident. It's funny that you say he was dialed down, because I think that's what he was going for. He wanted to make Bruce Wayne more effortless in this movie. And it's so funny, like you hear interviews of him talking about it now, because so many people are so anchored to the Joker in this film that he's like, I kind of wish I was doing more. I wish I was like, putting some more heat on the ball, so to speak, like a little bit of mustard on there, because the Joker is the thing that stands out. And what he's doing is withdrawing, like with Bruce Wayne as an individual, as an identity behind the scenes. Bruce Wayne is more effortless in front of the scenes. And then Batman, whether he's masked or unmasked, there's so much more of Bruce Wayne being Batman in this movie, whether he's dressed as Batman or not as Batman, that I love. So, for example, the moments where he's just in his motorcycle gear and he's investigating stuff in his bunker with Alfred, and then he goes out and investigates the scene, that's still Batman. Because, like, Batman's three guys. Like, there's Bruce Wayne, fake Bruce Wayne, then there's Batman with the cowl on, and then there's kind of like this middle who Bruce Wayne really is, like when he's in the bunker with Alfred. Like, that's also kind of not quite Bruce Wayne, and nor is it Batman. It's this like third thing. So he's got this great way of then portraying these three different entities. Both of Batman and the Bruce Wayne are the showier ones. I like the unmasked Batman, the guy who's thinking and tinkering and, thoughtful. They're the great scenes, and that's where he's such a great complementary figure, because he's very good at like bringing out and eking out these awesome, supporting performances, Michael Caine's size of a tangerine speech, like all that stuff is just so, I eat it up. I love it.
Yeah, it's super strong. I also think the moment when he's listening to Dent talk about Julius Caesar, and I think Caesar's an interesting character and play in history to think about in terms of this movie, but when he's talking about how the Romans elected one man and it cuts to Christian Bale and he's just watching him, in that moment he's that third guy. He's that guy who's like, holy shit, this is the thing that could change this for me. And that's what makes the ending of the movie so tragic. And I think that one of the best performance moments in the entire movie, and we can debate the Batman voice to death, but that last scene where he's confronting Dent, Aaron Eckhart, who's so phenomenal in this movie. Every time I watch it, I'm more impressed. That's that moment where the Batman and the Bruce Wayne identities collide, when he's talking about how it wasn't just Harvey Dent that lost everything. That really, I think it's a very moving. That final scene is incredibly disturbing, but it's also that final confrontation is so remarkable because it's so moving and it's so disturbing simultaneously. And I feel like that the movie kind of weirdly achieves this like great tragedy that I've never seen in a film of this type, because all this kind of hope is lost. And I think that that's really amazing. And it's where that Bruce Wayne Batman characters collide so successfully.
Yeah, I forgot how good a job the film does making Harvey Dent be kind of this like in-between character between Batman and the Joker. And watching it again, because it's been a really long time since I've seen it, but watching it again, that became like way clearer to me. I was like, oh yeah, obviously that's what like Two-Face is trying, like what Two-Face's role is doing.
You don't watch this movie like once a year? What is wrong with you? What else are you watching?
Zodiac.
Pasolini? Are you just watching Pasolini over and over again?
Pasolini, just Sallow, and Zodiac, just on just constant like loops.
It makes sense.
Yep.
I mean, except for the Pasolini.
George is just watching Only God Forgives on a loop. In neon lights, writing letters to Nicholas Winding Refn just over and over again every day.
He's crying his eyes out.
Yeah, I have a 24-hour Zodiac project going where I've slowed down Zodiac to in the last 24 hours.
Oh my God, that sounds... But it's only the last scene. It's only the last scene.
It's only the last, 12 minutes.
It sounds like a great idea. Let's get right down to it. Gary Oldman as Jim Gordon in this movie. What stood out to me, and I don't know what you guys think, but there's the moment in the movie where he's having the debate with Eckhart, and he says, you know, I'm not allowed to be an idealist. I do the best I can with what I have. And I think that is such a key line to understanding what this movie is about, because
and it's super reactionary. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
You're super reactionary. Shut up. Because I think that's what I think that is actually, I think that one of the things that this movie has to say is that like it's an imperfect world that we're all living in. We've created these structures for people to exist in. They're not working. They're also maybe the best we can do in our present conversation. And I think that it's one of the reasons I think Gary Oldman is the best thing about the movie is he has this kind of like world weary quality that's like there's no right solution to any of these problems. I'm just existing. And I think that that's like key to understanding what the movie has to say. And George already shook his head and went so we'll see if there's an agreement or a
next time, George. Can you please put that? Can you please put that on mic?
Yeah.
I'll try.
As he sips his tea. But I think Gordon is the key to understanding what the movie has to say, ultimately, to some extent. To me.
George?
Silence.
Oh, is it my turn to go? No, I mean,
all right, Blake, go ahead. Thank you.
Well, it's just because there's just so much going on in this film. It is so packed. And I agree with what you're saying, but I also think that Gordon's character in a way is kind of there to very much align with what Batman is meant to kind of represent, if that makes sense. So I always saw kind of Gordon's character here as kind of just a mouthpiece for what Batman is attempting to do.
Matt Zoller Seitz, who's a wonderful critic, and editor at large or editor in chief of RogerEbert.com. Usually, right now it's Brian Tallarico, who's also extreme talent. But Matt is a guy I've spoken to a couple of times, and Matt has a theory which I love, which is whoever says the title of the movie is who the movie is about. And so There's a great reading of this thing to talk about Gordon's worldview, because if you think about his trajectory from Batman Begins to now, he's a guy who was operating in a corrupt system, was a lone, incorruptible force at that time, and just was kind of like having to turn the other cheek just for self-preservation. And in this iteration of Gotham, especially with Harvey Dent there, he's actually been granted a significant amount of power to change it for good. So like to culturally, when we talk about the internal culture of the Gotham PD, which like Nolan famously just said like they're just as a corrupt force as any of the criminals in the city in Batman Begins, which kind of made sense to why Gotham was so screwed. And so you get him in this talking about the restoration of the order and working with Harvey Dent and, you know, again, finding sort of kinship in this other incorruptible force, and now like a legitimate incorruptible force, because you got, there's a great triumvirate, right, of like Gordon, Harvey, Batman, and how those guys work together, and then obviously the relationship with the Joker, and then with Two-Face. So yeah, I think there's a reading here. You know, I haven't like gone completely deep on it that talks about him being the character, because Batman Begins is never actually, that line is never mentioned in Batman Begins the movie, so you know that wasn't there. But
except when Batman says "I begin" and he jumps off the roof.
That's in the director's cut. But I think that there's definitely a reason to say that. I love Jim Gordon as a character because he's very much a morality, and it's also like what Jim gets to do is the Joker gets to tell Batman what he is and how ridiculous he is, and then Jim Gordon gets to tell him why he matters. And so I find him to be so essential. But you know, with great films there is an alchemy. There is something that you cannot take. Like I can't take Jim Gordon out of this movie, nor can I take Alfred out of this movie, nor can I take Eckhart, Stant, early or late out of this movie and think of, you know, who's not playing a really key role, because I think they're all doing these things, and it's all about moral barometers and that self-deception. And so, yeah, I find him so essential to all of these movies. But he's
kind of the heart and soul of these movies a little bit. And I think that the thing that's interesting, George, is I don't really necessarily view him as a mouthpiece, because I think he stands in the intersection between the sort of idealism, the glorious idealism of Harvey Dent, which is like something that is meaningful and something to aspire to, versus the kind of like, I mean, I think the thing that we always keep having to come back to is the idea that ultimately Batman is a fascist that beats mentally ill people and throws them in jail. To something like, if we're going to read the ultimate, and this movie flirts with that in ways that I don't think, not even flirts with that, directly kind of confronts that in my mind. And I think that you see someone like Gordon who's world weary and has to deal with the red tape of doing things, and like wants to do right by the world. And I think that to me, the whole thing is about like being between those two worlds, and he personifies that so effectively, because this is to Gary Oldman's credit, like from that very first moment in Begins when he puts the jacket on young Bruce Wayne, which is why one of the few moments that really resonates with me in Rises is when I was in the movie theater sobbing my eyes out when Batman says like sometimes all it takes is like a warm like whatever it is, like I think he's a little bit wasted in Rises, but he has that incredible moment at the end of the film that I think is so beautiful, because he's kind of the everyday guy in that movie in terms of what he represents to the story. And how
we can't dive too much into Rises. This will be a 5-hour podcast. Let's just get it. You know.
I know, God, we might have to have you back.
Rises is a whole other question.
One thing, Liam, though, you've been saying a couple of times is that these films and the Batman films in general are interesting to you when they're very much about Gotham City. So I think also what I kind of meant about him being like a mouthpiece is that he's also very much, I think, kind of like a representation of what like Gotham City is supposed to be at any kind of given moment. So I think he's also kind of, he almost like in a weird way kind of at least maybe in this film. And and I do have to think about it a little bit more because it was just so kind of focused on the dynamic between Batman and the Joker. Seeing it again is to just think about the role he plays as a kind of Greek chorus.
He's a Greek chorus. He also, to me, reads as Brutus from Julius Caesar. He's kind of the character in the middle who's exhausted and I know what I have to do, and I don't want to do it, but I'm going to do it.
Sure,
And I think that moment when he destroys the bat signal God, Gary Oldman is a fucking incredible actor because that moment
pretty
is so
fucking
rich.
awesome, yeah.
He also is able to say The Dark Knight and like get goosebumps rising in every part of your body, as opposed to just
Very
being
good
like,
ending.
Oh, okay,
Very good ending.
amazing ending. Every time I watch this movie, I'm more blown away by Aaron Eckhart, and I think that Harvey Dent is such a cow. Like he's kind of like the cowboy of the movie in the sense but like the kind of classical Gary Cooper cowboy. Like he punches the villain, he kisses the girl. He's so believable as the overconfident, smart, accomplished shithead who's ultimately right. Like you kind of want to fight the guy because he seems like the guy that would beat somebody up in high school, but has like grown into an actual human being. And his fall is so like perfectly stabilized in the film. I just found it so incredible to rewatch it and think a little bit. And I've heard people say that like there's this movie is a little bit of the reflection of like the Obama years, and I'm wondering what you guys think. If it reads that way, because I've heard people compare.
I'll let George
to
take
Barack
that, but I'll just say with all great movies, you have actors and performers who who make choices that is absolutely sincere and earnest for the point of the character, that you can then totally take the piss out of with your friends after you watch it and when you love it. Like I cannot say enough. Like Rachel, oh, no, like it's so fun to do that like I don't want to do it any more loud to blow people's ears out in this podcast, but that is
so
such
good.
a fun impression to do with your friends. Like,
or the moment when he's like, say it.
It's just, look, I'm just gonna go right there and say it. Like, you're allowed to love something and take the absolute piss out of it.
Yeah,
and
of course.
For that reason, I love his performance, but I also really love when it's like, no.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's good. He really blows it.
He's
blows
given
the
it.
back out of the movie theater.
He is given it in that moment. It's good.
Yeah, he really. It's kind of. I feel like maybe he like came in and read, and Christopher Nolan was like, "Don't say anything. Shut up. You blonde hair beauty. Shut up. Let's just do
bigger,
this."
louder, uncut. Do it."
But I think it's a I think it's a real, and then there's something amazing about his idealism. It's an incredible take. I still wish we got to see Billy D. Williams' take on Two-Face. I think that would have been incredible, but alas, we never got it.
It's in the animated series, isn't it? He's have you guys seen the Lego Batman? You've seen the Lego Batman? No?
I've not seen the Lego Batman.
Lego Batman, Billy D. Williams voices Two-Face.
Oh, that's amazing.
Oh. Wow, I did not know
very
that.
Cool.
That's next. George, Harvey Dent.
God, what's there to be said about Harvey Dent? No, I mean, again, I think I already just kind of said it, that he's a very interesting kind of balance between these two extreme poles, between like the Joker and what the Batman represents. I just want to maybe hear a little bit more about what you said about how people read this as a film that in some sort of way like prefiguring the Obama years.
Oh, not that it prefigures, because I think it came out the same year. But
well, I mean,
but it was what, 6 months? Well, just that he represents this kind of idealistic figure that people then lost faith in, or that one of the big things about the film that I think is amazing is the idea of the need to lie to create a mythology that keeps people. And that obviously, the idea that they lie. Batman becomes the hero that becomes the villain so that Dent can remain the hero is such a like timeless idea about how we understand narrative in terms of like how we understand.
Sorry to interrupt. There's two films that come very close to one another, and on reflection, when you talk about idealistic figures and just being inquisitive about them. So like I think that the readings that I've heard about Dent as this idealistic figure is going, you can't just trust a single figure. And similarly, a film that was kind of derided, or at least not nearly as appreciated as it should be when it was released, is Australian filmmaker Andrew Dominic made a film called Killing Them Softly. It starred Brad Pitt, Ray Liotta, and the inimitable James Gandolfini. It's an absolutely incredible film. And at the end of the film, there's a monologue from Brad Pitt's character where he is talking about, he's talking to and about like the hope that is pouring out of the screen in a television broadcast of one of the Obama rallies and speeches. And he basically says and concludes and just goes, and I don't care what this fucking guy says, pay me my money. And like at the time when this movie released, people were like, oh, that's really bleak, no hope, whatever. But it has aged beautifully. Like the cynicism has aged beautifully of like, yes, we can be hopeful for individual figures, but it takes way more than an individual. It takes systemic things to enact change over a long period of time. And so you can't necessarily trust that it's just all going to be hunky-dory and beautiful and seamless. And I just don't think people were ready to have that dialogue with this movie. And I think also that's part of that reading with Harvey Dent, right? It's like there are these figures, they are going to be questionable. We are going to have to tangle with that. No one is perfect. And Nolan has to make that an extreme. Of course, it's a guy who like kills people and has half his face burned off and makes that all the more problematic to wrestle with. But it's those, I think both of those ideas, killing them softly so much more overtly about that. But I think that, that's potentially a reading of that, let's just not completely be taken with that.
Yeah, it's very interesting earlier in the film when Dent kidnaps or grabs that guy, David Dalsmachian, the actor who's so good in his brief moments in the film, and kind of interrogates him, and Batman finds him and he's like, what are you doing? And it kind of chips away at the kind of like armor that is Dent as the like high-minded, completely uncompromised political figure. So it's one of the great things about the movie is it cracks away, it does away at that armor earlier in the film, and I think that it's really, at the end of the day it suggests more nuance to the character than what is initially there. And I think that I appreciate that a lot.
That seems pivotal, obviously, to show that when he does turn into Two-Face, there's something already there to suggest that he can become this like maniacal, homicidal, like maniac. Totally, yeah.
Let's talk about very briefly Lucius Fox and mass surveillance, because I think it's such a
small topic, mass surveillance.
Small topic, real quick, but the idea of him being like, in terms of that scene where he's like, I'll help you this one time, but consider this my resignation. I'm quitting. But
I'll be back for the third film in the franchise.
Well, he doesn't quit because he types his name into the computer and the computer
self-destructs
shuts down. And because it's one of those moments where Batman's like, I'm just going to do this one time. I'm only going to do it now.
I will only torture some people.
This is the most overt political thing for me in this entire film, which is that, we've just been in an environment with George Bush and having, crazy irrational threats happen on the homeland, which you then have to respond to. And you might do things that have to then sacrifice people's liberties, personal liberties. But Bruce Wayne has the foresight to say no, and this is his goodness of like, I'm going to do this and I'm doing it once and I'm catching him and he's gone and it's done. I don't need to do this for anyone else. I need to do it for him because he's an impossible out of the paradigm thing that exists and this is how I have to respond to it. So I think there's so much more of a political reading on this for that because he has to do it other than the fact that it looks cool. Because he can see through the building with his light up Batman eyes. That's
it's like bat sonar. Yeah.
Yeah, like that, and, all props to Batman and Robin for firstly introducing Bat Sonar or whatever, or I can't even remember those 2-second movies.
And shark repellent spray. Never forget the shark repellent spray. It's very important. Yeah, I mean, it reads really interestingly. George, I don't know how you felt watching that or seeing that this time.
Well, again, it's one of the most overtly political moments in the film. But again, I also think there is a certain kind of troubling. I was never a fan of it, but people who saw a lot of 24, for example, and different kind of dynamic. But
yeah, 24 is like yay waterboarding the show.
Yes, yeah. But then from what I've heard of it, there was always like, well, I don't want to torture this person, but I have to. And it's couched in these kind of morally ambiguous ways, but it's always like the right thing to do. And the same thing, watching this again, it's the same thing where it's like, I don't want to do this like mass surveillance project, but I'll only do it the once and then it'll be done. And I think just kind of the whole like having your cake and eating it too is also, again, a way to delve into like to basically say like it's okay to do this as long as you're doing it, as Blake said, like at those moments when it's like potentially outside of the paradigm or where, let's say, martial law has been declared.
Yeah, it's okay. So what's so cool about this movie, and I think about it in retrospect, is we're talking about martial law, mass surveillance, political figures of hope that are deeply questionable, corrupt systems. Batman's girlfriend dies, a guy's face gets burned, and he's like killed, like trying to enact vigilante justice on Batman. And it's like, it's just jam-packed with all things that, like, when you look at them in individual bite-sized chunks, you're like, how the hell is this a comic book movie that made $500 million in America? It's, like, unbelievable that it has all this stuff. So, yeah, like, I think I would have never had that surveillance reading until later. And, like, I've just been reading for one of my projects, like, Edward Snowden's Permanent Record, his novel Permanent Record. And I'm just like, like, that's that's a reading that happened in a mass budget Warner Brothers film.
And all that shit,
with Batman.
Like the Snowden stuff, the Prism stuff, we're talking years after this film. So it's really fascinating, obviously, again, like how plugged in this film is to clearly like what the George Bush administration was doing, and obviously kind of like the implications of it to come afterwards. Totally.
I think that one of the greatest achievements of this whole trilogy, and I very quickly pulled up Scott Tobias's review of The Dark Knight Rises, which is, I mean, Scott Tobias is the best. And this review...
He's very good.
Is so good. And he has a line at the end where he's talking about that there's a catch-all quality. It's regarding Rises, but I think it applies here. There's a catch-all quality to the politics of it. The Occupy movement could be viewed here as a unifying force or order-upending menace, but Nolan seems content to let his popular entertainment double as a Rorschach test. And I think that that's ultimately what works so well about this movie, is that you can walk out having a multitude of reactions to what it means. And it's so, to your point, Blake, it's so astonishing. Like, it's really one of those films where midway, you're watching Two-Face say to Jim Gordon, tell your boy it's going to be okay, lie, before he shoots the kid in the face. And you're like, I'm watching a comic book movie.
Yeah. And and other times you're like, man, I really hope it works out for Happy and Aunt May. Like I really, that's what I feel when I watch Marvel movies. It's just there are different muscles
soap opera.
A little bit of different muscles being flexed. Yeah, look, it's fascinating. Roger Ebert's 2 reviews that year of comic book movies, Iron Man and The Dark Knight. I would strongly recommend to go to rogerebert.com and read it, and to read anything that Matt Zoller-Seitz has written on The Dark Knight Rises, which is just great.
I should go back and check it out. I'm excited to rewatch that because I have not historically been a fan of it, but I'm wondering if when we did Philip Seymour Hoffman last year, I rewatched The Master and I was totally blown away by it. And I was one of those movies where I was like, I don't know what I missed the first time I saw this movie, but I found it really amazing that time.
Were you drunk?
No, here's what I was. I was.
Is that the one you fell asleep in?
Fell asleep twice because I was jet lagged. I had been in the UK and I'd come back and I went the day after I got back and I fell asleep, and then I went and saw it 3 days later because I was like, I missed it, and then I didn't watch it for years because I was like, I don't think I like, and then I rewatched it. I was like, oh my god, this movie's fucking perfect. Everything about this movie is that would withstand a minute by minute dissection.
Sure.
Sure.
Need a good pun though to go with The Master. Figure it out.
I've got one more thing I want to talk about, and then we can.
I can't reveal all my secrets.
Just
I like the idea that you have like this huge list of just like films and all the potential ways to fuck around with the title.
There is a list.
The Water Boy.
Bobby Boucher Minute Podcast. Sorry. Mama said. You call that podcast Mama said. What is my favorite?
A startling minute-by-minute dissection of Adam Sandler's masterpiece. Where football and high school meet.
Look, the number one would be, it's Billy Minutson would have to be what it was, right? You'd have to okay, that's for your listeners. Someone take Billy that. I'm not doing it. I haven't got enough time.
It would be Little Nicky.
I would do a 135-minute podcast or 135 episodes on Uncut Gems, very happily.
You would, yeah.
Oh my god! And Cold War?
Look, Travis just wrote a really great article actually about on Bright Wall Dark Room about it. What is my favorite element of this movie?
What's your favorite thing about the movie?
I think my favorite part of the entire film is just because of how so affecting it is is the Joker's self-filmed, his self-filmed captive interrogation, and then sort of demands. I just where he's like, where he's like, look at me. Like that, there is something. I mean, I think Heath Ledger, may he rest in peace. This movie made him the biggest movie star in the whole world and an icon. Like I showed you guys a painting that is in my office that I bought in Thailand. And I was on a beach in Thailand and there were like people selling, pop culture paintings and stuff. And I bought it in Thailand. Like, and I rolled it up and put it in my pack. Like, I think that Heath Ledger's performance there is his most primal. And what Nolan says about that particular scene is that it was something that he and Heath designed, and he allowed Heath to direct how the scene would be shot and the energy of that. And I think there is something that is so profound when you really see actors and directors trusting the living shit out of each other to do something, to go for a thing, and they are in sync, because the collaboration of a director is like harnessing a great actor, like a really well-cast person and a great script, and then finding osmosis in where you can be organic in these gigantic planned things. And even Michael Mann in Heat talks about like he used to, do 5 or 6 takes of what was the script. And then when they did it, particularly for Pacino, they'd go, let's do a wild one. Like, he's like, cool, you can do as many as you like. He'd do 5 or 6 in the can. Usually by the 5th or 6th take, he's got it. And then he's like, cool. Al's like, let's do a wild one. And he's got a great ass. Like, that scene is a wild one. That's a wild one. It wasn't in the script. Like, it's just him going for it, right? So this scene for me, obviously those two scenes have got completely different energies, completely different intents, completely different readings. But the way that the structure of that scene coming, the news broadcast coming, you seeing it pivoting to like your first person experiential, like face to face with his handy cam footage, and then the hard cut to Bruce Wayne's penthouse and this beautiful ominous Hans Zimmer score. I just think that when I look at that sequence, I go, there's not a more powerful, chaotic, gut-wrenching moment of this movie for me. And I just watch it over and over again, and I've probably got plenty of others that would come up and resonate later. The ending is perfect. The opening, the whole movie's a massive riff with Heat. Nolan's a Michael Mann obsessive to the point that like Insomnia is a direct Heat sequel. That is my theory. Like, go and watch that. That's what Nolan thinks Vincent Hanna does in his older career. He turns into a corrupt, self-deceptive person. And then Heat is his Dark Knight is him tackling Heat directly. But I just genuinely think that scene is as powerful as it gets, and it's kind of why Heath Ledger, his performance is endured like that. He's exploding. He's exploding out of the scenes. He's unbelievable.
It's almost like a performance that exists outside of the movie. Like, it almost has this I mean, it's like I know a bunch of people who basically said, well, the only reason I saw the movie is because of Heath Ledger. And I mean, like, I think that the great thing about the movie is that the movie is as good as Heath Ledger. I really, really believe that. It's on a whole other level. George, what about you?
The opening heist sequence, I think, is just so fucking meticulously well crafted. The editing, the pacing, the way in which it introduces the Joker and kind of lets us in on what the character is, what the rest of the film will be about. And I think we briefly maybe said that it might be, at least for us, like the best 5 minutes of the entire Nolan trilogy. At least for me, it's kind of the part that really is like, man, this is so fucking intense, and it's so beautifully.
You don't love crashing this plane.
Yeah.
Crashing this plane.
Crashing this plane. I love that.
It
also have
doesn't
a Bane
matter
tattoo.
who we are.
I also have a Bane tattoo, which I will show you guys.
Wait, really?
Yeah, I do. I will show you.
Take a screenshot, put in the metadata
my
for
shirt
the
slightly, but you'll see it.
We need a picture. It didn't happen. Picture it.
You can snap it. You can snap it and post it on your socials when I show you.
I love that.
I agree. The heist is great. I am less fond of the heist because it is the most direct rip-off of Heat.
It's such a
And I would just look for anyone like. If you watch them side by side, you'll be flabbergasted. This is how you make $500 million out of Heat. Like you put Batman and the Joker in it. Like that's literally.
I would be curious to see if I know that Nolan hosted a Q&A about Heat at the DGA in LA a couple of years ago. I would love to hear what Michael Mann thought of The Dark Knight.
He loves it.
If he was like, Chris,
in the special editions of there's a special edition in Oz that came out a while back. I'm staring up to my shelf right now while I'm talking to you guys. There's a special edition Dark Knight limited series Blu-ray that came out in Oz. It was a limited series. I don't know if it came out all over the world, but there was like 5,000 copies in Oz, and I got it. And there's a documentary that features Michael Mann and Richard Donner talking about the Dark Knight series, and Donner talking about it too. But Michael Mann's not on there for a long time in the grand scheme of the documentary because it's got lots of different participants. But one of the things that he says is like he talks about the worldview, like Chris's worldview. That's what he's praising. He's like, Chris's worldview is amazing. Like to bring these characters into sort of a tangible contemporary reality and make it feel so authentic and have things to say is what he liked about it. And I don't think that Michael would be, shocked. Like Chris Nolan is the biggest fanboy of Kubrick and Michael Mann. Like if you were to just put a Venn diagram and have Stanley Kubrick on one side and Michael Mann on the other side, like Chris Nolan's in the middle, and that is what it is.
Yeah, it definitely reads that way. My absolute favorite thing about this movie is in a way it's the last confrontation between Oldman, Dent, and Batman.
Unbelievable scene.
Specifically, the line you wanted us to be decent men in an indecent time, because it speaks to this, like, we were talking earlier about how Heath Ledger's performance almost exists outside of the movie, but that roots it in so much of what I love about the movie, which is about these three guys trying to do the right thing in an incredibly compromised way. And I think it achieves this other level. It's like operatically amazing.
Couldn't agree more.
Fucking rules.
This movie rules.
This movie rules.
I think the kids say it slaps.
They do.
Those
fucking
kids
slaps. This movie slaps.
Kids with their lingo.
Blake, this has been great.
Yeah, Blake.
Thank you for taking some time.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Like I don't get to talk about Batman enough.
Do you want to come back?
I would come back. Sure.
Okay, come back. We're
here.
No, it'd be great.
We're not going. We're literally not going anywhere.
I haven't talked about him in a long time. I've been too occupied with 1976 journalists uncovering political fuckery and one of the great existential crime dramas ever made. So that's kind of where my headspace has been at.
So you're not busy, is what you're saying.
No, two kids, columnists, three podcasts, 4 on the way. There's a lot happening.
4 on the way?
Yeah, there's a few on the way.
Okay. Well, we look forward. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks again, Blake.
Thank you guys for having me. Now, just while we've just got one last second while you guys are closing out, I'm
here we go.
You the Bane tattoo while we're recording.
George, do the video record.
This is Oeuvre Busters After Dark.
Whoa. We see it. We got it. Oh no.
Oh wow.
Holy shit.
How many sittings did that take?
Just the one. It was about 7 hours.
But Tom Hardy did it, which is the crazy thing. Is that Tom Hardy was there in the mask.
It was Tom Hardy. He was modeling for it. There you go.
Well, I'm Liam Billingham.
I'm George Fragopoulos.
I'm Blake Howard.
And this was
Oeuvre Busters. Yeah, we did it. We were really civil, Liam.